Welcome to a special episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Happy to have you all with us. We thought we would take the air today on Tuesday instead of our normal Wednesday. We will still be taking the air on Wednesday, but we thought we would take the air in addition on Tuesday because of some news that has come down the pike about the Cincinnati Bengals, because we've received a handful of questions throughout the weekend and the week. So we wanted to get to some of that today in conjunction with our usual weekly show. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I'm joined by a very festive-looking John Sheeran for those of you joining us via video, whether that's through Facebook, Cincy Jungle's Facebook, or the YouTube channel. John, how you doing, buddy? Do we have a name for the thing you're sporting on your head there?
I think we should just call it what it is and say it's a parrot hat. Okay. The reason why I'm wearing this is because I went upstairs in my house to get my phone charger to charge while the show's going on. And I figured, I saw this in my closet, and I figured I would probably, there might be some people out there that want to kind of rub in my face about something that I might have said a week or two ago about a certain player who may have gotten released today. So I figured, I might as well just get ahead of eating crow on something like this. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about what I said. But yeah, this is my self-inflicted punishment for unfortunately getting something wrong. So let's go ahead and get into it.
People have short memories, John. It's okay. And we talk a lot, so who knows what you can take serious with us or not. But we'll talk about that in a second. I do like the hat, though. A lot of positive compliments.
It's a great hat
in the live chat. It is a great hat. It is a great hat. We're going to talk about some news and notes, some recent happenings, where we're at in the state of affairs in terms of the Cincinnati Bengals a couple weeks into free agency as they prep for the draft. We are on the eve of the month of April, which is draft month, despite everything that's going on in the world. By the way, we hope you are all safe. We hope your family and friends are doing okay throughout this crazy, crazy time in the world. So stay safe out there. We also will be taking some listener questions. We've got some queued up. We'll be doing that kind of the last half of this episode. So if you want to leave some, do so in one of the live chats, Facebook or YouTube. We have a comment thread on cincyjungle.com we'll be looking at. You can tweet us at BengalsOBI on Twitter. The obinsider@gmail.com is the email address, or you can call and text us 949-542-6241. We'll be here for a little bit. And I do want to remind you that we will be still doing our own usual weekly show tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and we'll be talking more about the draft and some other topics. But basically, we kind of wanted to break this up because we feel like if we talked about everything, we tried to get to questions, we'd have a marathon show. So we wanted to kind of break this up for everybody here. John, the big news on Tuesday afternoon, or I guess Tuesday morning, was that the Bengals somewhat predictably cut ties with Dre Kirkpatrick, saving themselves about $8.3 million in cap space this year. He had 2 years left on the contract, was set to be a free agent in 2022, signed a massive 5-year deal a few off seasons ago. It was kind of one of those things where, the cornerback market is always high priced. It was high priced at the time. But the Bengals also lost some other very high-profile free agents that same offseason, and it was almost kind of like, here, we got to give some big money to somebody. So that's kind of part of what happened there. But overall, your impressions of the Dre Kirkpatrick release, like I said, sort of expected, maybe not also based on some things you had heard and relayed to us and other facets surrounding the situation.
Right. Just looking at why it happened, it makes complete and total sense. You signed Trey Waynes to a contract where he's going to be here for at least the next 2 years. He's making $31 million the next 2 years. Next 2 years, you have Drake Kirkpatrick under contract. You're thinking, where are they going to have him on the field, right? He would be a rotational guy at best because he's not overtaking William Jackson at a position that he's established himself, especially when he's going to be in a contract year. You're not playing him in the slot. Best case scenario would be to have him on the roster as a backup, but a high-priced backup. So you think, okay, maybe you restructure his deal. The way that his deal has already played out, it would be kind of hard to restructure and reposition some of that signing bonus money to kind of lower his cap hit. So that whole situation, I think, ended up not being very viable. And obviously, they would have liked to trade him. Instead of just cutting him for nothing, they would have liked to get something in terms of compensation. But I get the feeling that they didn't really try very hard for that. And this was almost kind of like something that was almost an inevitability. And what I heard, going into the situation, even after the Trey Waynes signing, was that Mike Brown was very enamored still with Drake Kirkpatrick, and the Bengals did not want to release him. They didn't want to have him take a pay cut or anything like this. But what ended up happening was what they should have done. They saved $8.3 million in cap space to get rid of a guy that was no longer going to be starting here. And I think we should all appreciate the good things that Dre did for this team. He had some great moments, specifically before he signed that $52 million extension. We have to also remember about that extension. Only $12 million of that was guaranteed. Kevin Zeitler, who was signed that offseason, got like $30 million from the Cleveland Browns. Andrew Wilworth's got about like $20 million for the Rams. Those are obviously the two guys that Bengals fans would have rather seen come back to Cincinnati. But Drake Kirkpatrick, while he had the $52 million attached to his name, only $12 million of that deal was actually real, and that's why the Bengals were so willing to offer him that deal, because that's the type of deal that the Bengals would typically offer to their own free agents. So I think when you look back at the Kirkpatrick era, there was obviously that very long and the fact that he didn't get on the field for the first 3 years because he was injured. He just couldn't, overtake some of those veteran starters. But he did have a couple of good years from 2015 to 2016 that ended up having him earn that contract. But it was definitely time with the way that whole group evolved and the fact that he was just going to cost too much money to not be the contributor that he once thought he was. So it had to happen. It would have been nice to see him stay on as a backup for a lesser price. But if that wasn't viable, then this was the only opportunity. This is the only route that they could have taken.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of mixed emotions from Bengals fans in terms of this move. It's this is a tough day, and yeah, I mean, he was with the team for quite a long time, and he was a guy that played pretty well at times, was kind of a big play guy at times, and a big play guy that for both the positive and the negative. You look here, John. I mean, you talked about when Dre received this extension, and I believe it was going into 2017 that he got this extension. So really at the time, you had a cornerback that the team felt was – I pulled up the stats for those tuning in live or watching the video feed after. Really what you have is a player, when you look at 2015, 2016, those were the first 2 years where he was relied upon to start. They felt at the time that he was a player entering his prime as a cornerback, would probably play out or most of this next contract. And at that point, you maybe reassess things from there and decide whether you wanted to keep him or not. Cornerbacks, good starting, solid cornerbacks are hard to find. And, the team felt at the time that this was a guy that they could rely upon, a building block piece. They felt that they had that guy entering his prime. Unfortunately, what you see is, as a reserve guy in 2013 and 2014, 6 combined interceptions, 2 total return for touchdowns. In 2016, you mentioned the good season there, 3 interceptions and another 1 in 2017. You also pointed out other facets. I mean, double-digit pass defense in 2015 through 2017. Basically, a combined 40 throughout for those 3 seasons. So pretty solid work in that regard as well. But the penalties, and as you see, John, 2015, 2018, 2019, granted some injuries the past couple of years, but 3 seasons as a starting cornerback, and you have 0 interceptions. Interceptions are not the end-all, be-all statistic for a cornerback, but it's something you need more turnovers, and unfortunately the Bengals did not get that from him. And the injuries last year, they obviously the Dre was a holdover from Marvin, and this team wanted to go a different direction. So I think it would have been nice if he had taken a pay cut. That position group got decimated last year by injury, so you would have liked to have had that in the pocket. But if you could take a pay cut, or even if you're hanging on to him with that salary and he's number 4 on your depth chart, it just doesn't make sense. And I think most people remember the negatives, the pass interference penalties, the missed tackles, things like that. He did have some big plays. Unfortunately, with business decisions, they're the most difficult to make, and that's kind of where we're at with this thing. Yeah,
and another thing about, as soon as he got that contract, last 3 years combined, his average coverage grade from PFF is about 62. That 2016 season, that was his best year as a starter in terms of coverage grade. It was 71. He only had 9 penalties that year after having 13 the year before. He allowed a passer rating of just 68.9, and and then the 3 years following that, it was 92.7, 82.4. Had a lot of pass rating of 126.5 last year. So it didn't. I don't know if it was just the fact that he was playing in a contract year that allowed him to elevate his game, but they definitely weren't reaping the benefits of who he was after they signed that contract. So unfortunately, the return on investment was never there. But honestly, the last 3 years are basically the culmination of who Dre was as a player, right? He was a guy who had very inconsistent ball skills, who bit a lot on double moves. He got really handsy and unfortunately ended up getting flagged a lot. But those things kind of happen all throughout his career. And when he was in the prime of his career from like 2015 to 2016, you saw a lot more better moments. You saw a lot more times where he attacked the ball better. He got more ball production. He ended up making a lot more better plays. And you kind of took that with it because that's just the nature of cornerback play. You know, you're going to lose a lot, especially to athletes that are better than you. And Dre was never this prototypical athlete for the position, but the good plays have always countered that. And unfortunately, we just didn't see a good number of impact plays and positive plays from him in the past couple of years. And that's honestly why the perception of him is soured to the point where it was. And obviously the big salary number to his name didn't really help those matters at all either. So I think at the end of the day, the player who Dre is now is who he was destined to be coming out of Alabama, the player and the prospect that he was. It was good that he had those couple of years to end up, having him earn now $48 million in total from the Bengals in 8 years. But unfortunately, that's who he is now is just who he is. And we shouldn't expect him to be any better going forward.
Look, the guy was also, I know this isn't what you pay tens of millions of dollars for, but the guy was also a great team ambassador. He did a lot of stuff in the community, did a lot of stuff in his own home area, was really a team guy. And in a few years from that implosion against the Steelers and the subsequent 4 years of pretty awful football that followed, he was still rah, go Bengals. I want to be here. I believe in Marvin Lewis. I believe in Zach Taylor. I believe in what this team's doing. And you got to commend him for that. And I think at least some rational Bengals fans, I think, can sit here and say, well, look, the play was inconsistent, but there was at least the right attitude and a guy who really tried to step up and be a leader once the team in that same offseason they signed him, lost a couple of critical team leaders. He tried to step up and be that guy because he had that high-profile contract and had a modicum of success with the Bengals. We're going to be here for a few more minutes, getting through some more news and notes, as well as taking some questions in the last half of the show. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We are with CincyJungle.com, and this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this show on a number of different platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio. We have our own YouTube channel. And all of our stuff is on CincyJungle.com. This podcast and a couple of others are part of the essentially the group of official Bengals podcasts for SB Nation. Our show, Orange is the New Black, by Ace Boogie and Zim Hude, as well as Matt Minnick, who does his Chalk Talk episodes, does film review and other interviews. So check out all of the shows however you like to get the podcast, and join our show live when you're able, whether it's through our YouTube channel, Cincy Jungle's Facebook feed. We'd love to have you. Real quickly, John, the Bengals added another cornerback. It was kind of a little, I guess, a confusing move because it was like he was released and then maybe re-signed. There's a lot of different stuff going on with Greg Mabin, a reserve corner, probably a guy that's going to be grinding for a roster spot going forward, but he is added to the cornerback group as Dre Kirkpatrick exits that minimum salary, probably not much more than a training camp / preseason body, I would assume. I hate to say that about a particular person, but at this point, when you sign two high-profile cornerbacks in free agency, I think that's kind of where Mabin's role will be coming up.
Right, and he was a restricted free agent entering this offseason because they signed him as a street free agent last year when they had all those injuries at the position. So he was one of the guys that had to step up when William Jackson and Drake Kirkpatrick missed a lot of time last year. But they did the same thing that they did with Torrey McTyer. So both of those guys entered restricted free agency. They didn't stick a tender onto them. So then they entered unrestricted free agency, and then they re-signed both of them to 1-year deals. Mabin's going to get the same deal that McTyer is. It's veteran minimum, going to be about an $800,000 salary cap hit. he's going to compete with guys like Tony Brown and Winston Rose to potentially take that 6th or even 7th quarterback spot. I mean, right now they have 9 guys on the roster, including LaShawn Sims, who they signed as like your Tony McRae replacement, as the guy that you would want to make the roster as a special team contributor. And you obviously have Darius Phillips, Mackenzie Alexander, William Jackson, and Trey Waynes. So it's interesting to look at this position group and think there's a lot of bodies, but there's not a lot of long-term stability because the vast majority of these guys have just 1 year left on their deals. So you think like maybe cornerback is a position that you would logistically target in the draft to just have a guy under contract beyond 2020, but also there's just not a lot of room at this position group right now. And you like the potential of guys like Tony Brown and Winston Rose, who you signed before guys like Maven. But yeah, like you said, Maven and McTire for that matter, are just here to be bodies for training camp in the preseason. And if they make waves, they make waves. But they're on 1 year deals for a reason.
Yep. So the Bengals need to find some stability. Waynes is the guy they're moving forward with for the next 3 years, but William Jackson in a contract year, Mackenzie Alexander 1 year contract. So yeah, there's a lot to sort out there for sure, John. Let's segue into, because you have had many different pieces of discussion on the Cincy Jungle comment threads as well as on Twitter about where the Bengals are at salary cap wise and space. And I know it's still a little fluid because specifics with the new acquisitions haven't been fully divulged, but you seem to have a pretty clear picture on that. And I was hoping you could relay that to the rest of us and our listeners.
Right. So right now, or at least for today, when Kirkpatrick was released, I think Over the Cap and Spotrac had the Bengals at approximately $12 million in cap space. Those numbers don't include Gigi Reader's contract. It doesn't include Josh Bynes' contract, and it doesn't include LaShawn Sims' contract. I believe Jeff Hobson, after DJ Reader was signed, alluded to DJ Reader having a cap hit of about $10 million. And you would think realistically Bynes and Sims aren't going to cost you more in total than $3 or $4 million. So any number that you see right now, it would be best to just subtract 13 to 14 million from that. So before Drake Kirkpatrick got released, they were at about 12 million. So you would think with those 3 contracts on the books, they would be in negative cap space. So this release gives them $8.3 million in space. The official listing right now is about 20 because it doesn't include Reader, Bynes, and Sims. But if you add all those guys in, I think you're at about $7 to $8 million in actual cap space. And that's not enough, obviously, to get the 7 draft picks signed. I think both those websites are listing the total rookie pool for the Bengals at about 11 to 12 million. Right, so they still need to free up a few million in space, and they would obviously like to get Andy Dalton's contract off the books. So any listing you see right now, you should probably just subtract 13 to 14 million dollars until Reader's contract details become available, and obviously Bynes and Sims.
So let's parlay that into the start of taking some of these listener questions that are coming our way. So if you want to get in touch with us, please do, and leave your question how you can. There's kind of to piggyback on a couple of them, Josh Holland in the live Facebook, as well as Tom Stevens in the live Facebook. They've got a couple of questions here. Basically, what happens to the $8+ million? Is it going somewhere else? Is it going to another player? Or, like you said, is it basically just kind of freeing up space for the rookie pool and what they usually like to do, in-season windfall, that sort of thing, and kind of catching back up from the other signings that they've made?
Right, and I think for the first time in I don't know how long, the Bengals were actually in salary cap trouble. Like they've always said that they were because they like to, allocate tens of millions of dollars for resources that they may or may not use. But for the first time, yeah, they were actually, if not in negative cap space, extremely nearing cap space or negative cap space. So that wasn't an actual problem because none of these contracts are official and they're not technically on the books yet in terms of the actual NFL transactions table and all that stuff. But yeah, they needed to get Dre's contract off the book if all 8 of their unrestricted free agent signings become official, along with AJ Green's franchise tag and the 4 restricted free agents that they signed. So I don't think the $8 million specifically goes to one player or another. I just think it was space that they actually needed and logistical space to create because you're not paying that much for just a backup at this point.
Yeah, I think if anything, there's going to be that money would maybe go to rental type of deal, an affordable rental type of deal for a veteran, especially after the draft, if they need a guy that maybe at a position that they maybe didn't get in the draft. Or as I mentioned on our last episode, the Bengals could be looking for other players at positions of need, post June 1st cuts and post final cuts. Those are guys on the waiver wire that they may look to pay. Let's go to some of our other let's on Twitter at Bengals OBI is our account. Anthony, please answer my question. I am not in favor of trading what I assume is the Burrow pick, no matter the compensation, but just in case, what would an offer to be too good to pass? Randy Dalton on Twitter. And we also got another question from another listener saying, what if Miami offered you this, that, and the other thing, picks for next couple of years. I kind of tire of talking about this, but it is kind of the topic du jour, I guess. I don't see the scenario. If the Bengals had a completely inactive free agency like they usually did, and you're kind of wondering, how are you a better team? Where have you made improvements? How have you spent the money to improve your team? They added 2 cornerbacks. They added an impact defensive tackle. They added an impact linebacker. These are some of the holes that needed to be filled in the draft. And now just go get your quarterback. I mean, it seems it's just simple. You have who many believe is a generational talented quarterback, had one of, if not the best college football season ever by a quarterback. You plugged holes in free agency. You spent the money. You've sat down and you've interviewed him. Just don't mess around. Just make the pick. Make it Joe Burrow.
Even if they didn't have the free agency period that they had, they still need to take the quarterback, because no position, no position gets you in a better position to be competitive than getting the top tier quarterback. The offer would be too big for the Dolphins to even consider. If you want to quantify it, I need every first round pick that they have for the next 3 to 4 years, and probably some day 2 picks as well. It would be an offer that there's under no circumstances would the Dolphins ever take it, but that's what it would take, which is why this isn't even a discussion. It's something that the Dolphins want, and it's something the Bengals don't want. So there's not going to be some type of compromise here, because one side literally does not want to move back. They want to take the quarterback that they want to take.
Yeah, the Bengals have the leverage here, so that's good news there. But I've kind of said this on Twitter before. If someone is willing to move up and give you this treasure trove of picks, doesn't that signal to you that the single player that they're moving up to probably get holds immense value? I mean, it's very simple. I mean, you can sit here and armchair quarterback it and say, no, you can go get pass rushers. You can get bolster the offensive line and get maybe a lesser talented quarterback, and they could still have success behind a bolstered offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. Just go get the quarterback. Just go get the quarterback. There's not too much that the Dolphins would be willing to part with that I would take if you're looking to get Joe Burrow. Let's move on, because that could just be an entire episode in itself. Patrick Esther emailed us talking about the Shawne Williams at linebacker with the Von Bell signing. Do you think that Shawne Williams, you talked about this a little bit on our show last week, John, is him potentially playing a linebacker-ish role? Is he the one that's going to move up and play the linebacker role? Is Von Bell the one that's going to move up and do the more in the box stuff? Or is Williams out of the picture now that they paid Bell quite a bit of money and they want to save potentially more cap space after the Drake Kirkpatrick release?
Everyone's calling Shawne Williams a linebacker right now, and I think it's safer to call Von Bell that, because I think no matter what you do with Williams, you're going to have Bell do exactly what you had Williams did last year, and Williams had the vast majority of his snaps at linebacker, and that's where Von Bell has played the best in his past with New Orleans. So I think if the Bengals had any brains whatsoever building this defense, they would recognize that they shouldn't play Von Bell as a deep safety in whatever scheme they want to run. If they want to do that, then if they want to have another deep safety back there with Bates, then they should make it Williams to get him on the field as much as possible with the money that he's making. I think it's either that or Williams is out of the picture entirely. I don't think they need to free up that $4 million in space. I think Williams is valuable depth at the position regardless. But I think that Von Bell is essentially a linebacker now. If he's going to take the role that Shawne Williams did last year. And you can call Williams whatever you want, but he's not very good in the box. That's why he had his worst season last year. We've already been over this countless times at this point. He plays the best when he's in that cover 2 safety role, when he can get downfield. And you would think it's kind of counterintuitive because he missed a lot of tackles because it doesn't take a lot of good angles. And you would think having him close to the line of scrimmage would eliminate those problems, but that's just not the case. He's just better back there. He's more comfortable back there. Maybe he was dealing with some injuries last year. Maybe that's the reason why he was struggling. Regardless, Bell's perfect for to do what they asked Shawne Williams to do last year. That's what's going to happen. The question is whether Williams stays, and I would be fine if he stayed. If he was depth at safety, or if he played more in a traditional safety role. But if not, then they'll be fine with just Bell.
Where do you want to go next?
We got a question here. I want to answer this. I want to take 2 separate questions to kind of convert them into one, if that's okay.
Okay.
So we got
not allowed.
Not allowed. All right, fine. So from the YouTube comment section, we got Mr. Whisper. He's asking, do you think with the possibilities of AJ not sticking around for longer than 1 year and Ross not panning out, that it would be wiser to take a wide receiver at 33, even if a good offensive lineman and linebacker are there? And we also had X Diaz from Facebook.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Denzel Mims or Justin Jefferson if you had the choice. And I feel like that would be a conversation to have if both those wide receivers are there, and you're also thinking about that philosophical question from Mr. Whisper. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'll answer the second part of the question first. I'm going to Tarantino the thing. I will, if I'm taking Joe Burrow and I have a choice between Justin Jefferson and Denzel Mims, Mims may be a little bit more higher upside in terms of athleticism, et cetera. Jefferson kind of surprised us all with his workout numbers, et cetera. But I would just say the chemistry is already there with the quarterback you're taking. And if you're going to be relying on rookie wide receiver, rookie quarterback, chemistry and knowing each other is kind of a big thing to help eliminate potential turnovers. So if it comes down to that decision, I would probably take Jefferson to pair with Burrow over Mims. Mims may be a better overall prospect in a lot of eyes, but for the specific quarterback the Bengals appear to be taking, I would probably take Jefferson in that scenario. In terms of, I think the initial question was overall need, taking a wide receiver at number 33. I have no problem taking a wide receiver at number 33. I think that this draft, now what the Bengals have done in free agency, which has been defensive heavy, I think that this draft, you're probably going to see 5 of their current 7 picks they hold be on offense, at least. And that's probably, to me, that's your quarterback. That's an interior offensive lineman, probably an offensive tackle, a wide receiver, and tight end, or 2 wide receivers instead of another tight end. I definitely see the team going offensive heavy in the draft and getting some young influx of talent that way. Potentially 33. Those 2 guys you mentioned would be guys I would look at 33. If you go defense in the second round, third round, you've got your Michael Pittmans. Maybe you take a flyer on a Chase Claypool based on his workouts, the big, huge kind of prototypical wide receiver guys. Depends on kind of what you want. The good news is this is a very deep class, and you could probably get contributors well into rounds 4 or 5.
I think the Jefferson conversation has been weird because, like our own Brian Creamer in the YouTube comment section saying many of these guys with buzz would be redundant with them already having Boyd. I think the perception is weird with Jefferson because he's a much better athlete than Tyler Boyd. 2, like he had a lot of slot production at LSU, but I really love Pro Football Focus's comparison to him, and it's Marvin Jones because he had a 92% catch rate in contested catch situations. He's obviously much faster. He does a lot. He's a great route runner already. He does a great job of high pointing the ball and just plucking balls out of the air. And like you mentioned, there's that already existing chemistry with Joe Burrow. Denzel Mims excites me a lot as an overall wide receiver prospect, but I don't see these redundancies with having Jefferson and Boyd on the same team. And even if that's to be the case, if you want to run an offense that Joe Burrow has experience running, go 4 wide, go into these 2x2 type of spread offense looks with Jefferson and Boyd and on the slot on each side of the formation, and have them just do what they do best. I think that Jefferson, his overall profile speaks much better than I think the perception about him is right now, especially with the fact that he tested a lot better as an athlete at the combine. But just the player who he is, he's a much more downfield, deep threat, jump ball type of player than I think he's getting credit for. So I would definitely have no problem taking Jefferson over Mims if that's the case.
Yeah. So let's segue into another question. Good friend of the show, Dan from Tennessee, texted us. this may be a offensive heavy draft. This may be kind of a way that Zach Taylor molds this team in his image, so to speak. There were some noticeable struggles last year in terms of the play calling, growing pains with him as both a head coach and an offensive play caller. It started to get a little better towards the end of the season, but it was more reliant on the run. Dan just kind of lays it out. Should he relinquish play call duties in 2020, meaning Zach Taylor?
No. I think you give him one more year with his actual quarterback. Again, I know people want to, be hard on Taylor for the lackluster job that the offense did to begin, and you obviously account for injuries as well. But man, it's weird because we're getting to the part where a lot of people are seeing why Andy Dalton needs to go and why he was the problem, but we're still not fully there because Taylor had to deal with Andy Dalton being his quarterback, and there's so many limitations you can have with the playbook as well, along with being an inexperienced play caller. I don't think people are properly weighting the fact that Andy Dalton had probably his worst year as a professional last year, and the fact that limited a lot what Taylor could do in this offense. He had to simplify completely. Defenses were able to adjust very fast. The fact that they didn't have a lot of personnel that could stretch the field, defenses were allowed to just take advantage and just run train on them and not let them have any explosive plays down the field. The fact that they didn't have an offensive line that could run block well for Joe Mixon, the fact that they had to get the ball out quickly because they couldn't rely on the pass protection. There were all these types of factors that I don't think was necessarily fair to Zach Taylor, and a lot of them had to do with the quarterback plays. So I don't think that we should just throw out the plan of Zach Taylor calling plays until we see issues with an actual competent quarterback under center.
I agree. I think that you got to give him, if you're going to do this, the cliched 3-year window for the head coach, where you give him a year to see to where he reassesses the roster that was under the previous regime. You give him years 2 and 3 to rebuild the roster in his image and implement really his style of play, his game plan, all that kind of stuff. You got to give him at least a year as still a play caller or the primary play caller, what have you, with a new quarterback that's his guy, a new group of players that are his guys, that sort of thing. I would not be opposed to him maybe leaning on somebody, or maybe it be a play calling by committee or a scheme by committee a little bit more than maybe it was last year. However, I think that we're going to see less predictability because of the massive amount of injuries that the offense was hit with. You're going to see less of a vanilla style of play because of who's under center and potentially these guys coming back from injury, that sort of thing. Maybe an uptick in offensive line play based on Shawne Williams and then whoever else they bring in this year's class. I think you got to give him another year. I think you got to give him another year to see it. And if there's not anything more than marginal improvement, then I think he's got to take the reins away from himself and give him off to somebody else. Let's get out of here in a minute or two, John. Anything else? Any other questions that we need to get to before we do, or ones that you would like to get to?
I want to go back to we had an email from Danny from the UK, our friends overseas. He asked, who would the Bengals have had to sacrifice in free agency aside from Josh Bynes had they landed a big linebacker like a Joe Schobert or a Corey Littleton?
To me, it has, and I hate to say this, it might have been Reeder. Both because of the price tag, but that was where their immediate pivot went, at least in terms of when the news cycle kind of trickled out. It was Reeder, and then later on it was Trey Waynes, and then the next day it was Mackenzie Alexander. So to me, I think both because of the price tag and frontline defense or run defense type of players, I think that's who would have been sacrificed. And right now, if you were asking me, would I have taken a Schobert or a Littleton and a lesser defensive, maybe like a Schobert or a Littleton and Andrew Billings, or a Josh Bynes and a DJ Reeder, I probably would have went Reeder and Bynes over Billings and Schobert or Littleton. That's just me. Probably not by much either, but to answer the specific question, I think Reeder would have been the guy who probably would not have been signed if they got one of those big price tag linebackers.
I agree. And they were obviously in the Schobert negotiations and discussions up until the very end. I think it was just Jacksonville just barely crossed the finish line with a price tag that the Bengals didn't want to match. And also Schobert got one extra year than Reeder did, and that may have been just too much that they didn't want to commit to. But yeah, I agree. I think Reeder would have probably been the next guy out. I think they had a plan at cornerback regardless of what they were going to do at linebacker or defensive line. The interesting thing is, though, like there's still a good number of quality defensive linemen still out there. I think Derek Wolfe just signed with the Ravens about a couple days ago for only like $6 million for just 1 year. Shelby Harris had to re-sign with the Broncos because his market wasn't doing too well. So I love DJ Reeder as the player. I think he provides a massive upgrade over what they were. It's just a matter of just there's a little more. The defensive line and specifically the interior defensive lineman class was a little bit deeper than the linebacker class. So maybe you would have thought that they would have been more wiser to get one of the best linebackers and maybe peek into the later market of the defensive lineman. But I think the way they handled it, it still ended up being more than okay, because I think you have more questions about Joe Schobert as a player than you would have DJ Reeder. I think you're more confident in your money going to Reeder than Schobert in that regard. And you would like the 1 year investment with Bynes because he's proven himself at this point. So the way they handled it is fine. But I think if they had gotten a Schobert or a Littleton, I think, like you said, Reeder would have been the guy that they would have gotten.
The other thing I want to talk about is, we get this question almost every time we take the air, is Clay Matthews, Clay Matthews, Clay Matthews. I don't know that we will see Clay Matthews on the Bengals. It kind of screams as a typical Bengals free agency signing. Maybe they get him on a rental deal, borderline Hall of Fame player on the back slide of his career, maybe only has a couple years left, could come in as a rotational guy, yada, yada. But either way, I think that's probably the missing piece of what's left in free agency, whether it's the post June 1st, whether it's the way, final cuts or waiver wire, or, I think that's maybe the last free agency piece, because you mentioned Derek Wolfe. That was a guy they had a very early visit with in the free agent period. They also, Chris Smith was another guy that they, courted before he went off to Carolina. They've Shaq Barrett last year. They want a rotational edge defender to go with who they already have. So I don't know if Clay Matthews will be the addition, but John, I do think that someone on a rental deal will probably be talked about, especially if they don't get the guy they want in a couple of weeks. Right.
And I think the player that Clay Matthews is that stand-up 34-ounce linebacker guy who can also potentially drop back. I think that's the guy they're going to be targeting in the draft. It's just a matter of if that guy is going to be there in the draft, because this isn't exactly a very strong edge rusher class, like specifically the top portion of it. So if a guy like Zach Bond isn't there, that second round pick, I think they're gonna have to get creative in order to add that kind of guy. Clay Matthews wouldn't come here on more than the 1 year deal. Who even knows if he's going to play football this year? Anyways, he's already this is like his 12th year in the league, so it wouldn't blow by anybody's it wouldn't surprise anybody if he just doesn't play football at all this year. But he doesn't necessarily solve anything because we don't know how much he has left in the tank. But the fact of the matter is they just don't have a lot of guys at edge rusher right now. So would he hurt? No, but would he help? I also don't know that either.
Right. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've gone through some news and notes and a number of different listener questions. Thank you for everyone for not only tuning in, but for submitting your questions. We tried to get to as much as we can in different platforms that you may have submitted those to us, so we appreciate that. We're going to try and get to more and more listener questions throughout the offseason, so continue to send those our way. If we didn't get to yours today or this week, definitely keep sending them our way. We do hold on to some that we don't get to and put them on a future show. So continue to be in touch with us. We want to continue answering as many questions as possible. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. As I mentioned, you can get it on a number of different audio platforms wherever you download your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. All of our stuff is on cincyjungle.com. We've got a lot coming at you on this specific program over the next couple of weeks. We're lining up some pretty high-profile interviews that we hope end up panning out, so we're trying to get that going. We we'll have an immense amount of draft coverage, both on our program as well as on CincyJungle.com. So keep it to both for that breakdown of picks, probably even some live streaming as picks happen, etc. So we're still kind of game planning that, but we will have an immense amount of draft coverage as we did last year. So keep it to our show and CincyJungle.com. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for contacting us. We're going to have our regularly scheduled show again Wednesday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. We're going to do that. We just decided to do some of this stuff, and then because there's so much to talk about, we're splitting it up basically into 2 different episodes. So hopefully you enjoy that. Thanks, John. I don't know if you want to retire that hat or not, but
I might be allergic because I'm noticing my neck is kind of red down here. So I need to take this off as soon as possible.
You may need to throw that thing in the washing machine if it's been sitting in a closet for a while, man.
I did not think this through, to be honest with you.
Well, it was a big hit. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people seem to like it. So, well, thanks, bud. I know that we kind of did this impromptu, but appreciate you jumping on here and giving your usual good insight.
As always, man.
All right. Take it easy, everyone.